Hello everybody. So I am making my way through the Arrowverse, and today I'm going to be talking about Arrow Season 4. Let's go. So unlike my previous video in the Arrowverse, where I combined Arrow Season 3 and Flash Season 1, I'm only going to be talking about Arrow Season 4 today because there's so much that I want to talk about in this, with this season of Arrow, that I think putting it in the same video as Flash Season 2, which I am thoroughly enjoying, by the way, but, putting it in the same video as Flash Season 2, I think it would be a way too long of a video, and I think I really want to talk about Season 4 on its own, Season 4 of Arrow on its own, because I think that it just deserves its own standalone video, because I have just the sheer amount of stuff that I want to say about it. So in this video, I'm only going to be talking about Arrow Season 4, and I'll have a later video to talk about Flash Season 2 and the crossover. Arrow Season 4, pretty much among Arrow fans, it's agreed to be like the worst season of Arrow. Pretty much every single review I've seen of Season 4 of Arrow has said that it is awful, it's terrible, it's maybe the worst season of Arrow ever. And I do not understand that at all. Like, honestly, I do not get how it gets so much hate, because I actually really enjoyed it. Much, much more than Season 3. And the weird thing is that, on paper, a lot of the stuff that they do in this season, I would have said I would normally not like. If you had told me that, we're going to have the main villain be sort of like a sorcerer dealing with magic, that's going to be a big part of this mystical stuff happening. That's going to be a big part of the season. And we're going to bring Sarah back to life. I would have said, no, that's just not a good idea. We're going to kill Laurel. No, you can't kill Laurel. Like, a lot of stuff that happens in this season, on paper, I would have said, no way, you can't do that. But the way they executed a lot of the stuff, I really enjoyed. I think that they did a good job with a lot of the stuff that I normally wouldn't like a show to do. They actually did it in a way that I really enjoyed. I think that Oliver and Felicity, they get a lot of hate, As a couple, it seems like everybody just hates Olicity. It seems like everybody's like, no, that's the worst shipping ever. That's awful. I actually enjoy Oliver and Felicity. I think that they're a great couple. I think they do their relationship well in this season, much better than Season 3, actually. Like, Season 3, I was like, I don't know about them here, but I think in this season, I really was invested in their relationship. I think that it was just really nice at the beginning of the season to just see them just living their normal lives. I think I liked seeing them just being happy together, just living normal lives outside of just, the whole Arrow vigilante thing, just being totally away from that, living normal lives. I liked seeing that, and obviously, you need to have them come back to Star City, which I think, I think that I liked calling it Starling City better than Star City, even though I guess that's more comic accurate. I guess it's, in the comics, it's Star City, but I like Starling City better. I feel like Starling, that sounds much better than Star City. I don't know. I like Starling City better, but, you have to find a way to bring them back to Star City, which I think that at the end of Season 3, I was kind of like, really? We're having them, retire, go off to live their normal lives, leave the city, and we're gonna have to find a way to bring them back. How are they gonna do that in a way that works? But I think they did find a way that worked. I think it worked much better than I thought it was going to. I don't think it was perfect, but I think that it worked much better. When they come back, they have this concern, are we going to be able to have our relationship and go back to doing this, Arrow vigilante saving the city thing? Are we gonna be able to have both? And as the season progresses, we find out they can't. They end up breaking up, and they don't end up coming back together yet. At the end of this season, I guess that's gonna happen in season 5. They haven't gotten back together yet, but I think that's something that this season does very well, is not letting, leaving hanging concerns or even hanging threats, like Damien Dark threatening Quentin that he's going to kill Laurel if Quentin betrays him. Like, that's not a hanging threat. Like, Quentin betrays Damien Dark, so Damien Dark fulfills his threat and kills Laurel. And I think, I'll get to more about Laurel's death and why I think they really did a good job with that, but that's a very important piece of, why Laurel's death works so much, is because it's the fulfillment of this threat that Damien Dark had on Quentin, that he said, if you betray me, I'm going to kill your daughter Laurel. And so, they have Quentin betray Dark. You can't have, that threat not end up fulfilled. You have to have Laurel die to show, how evil Dark is. And I think that Dark is a very good villain. I think he's much better than Ra's al Ghul. I think that they did a much better job at creating, showing his, villainous nature, how dangerous he is, with the magic, with the mystical elements of, being able to move things with his mind and stuff. And I think that, they did a really good job at establishing him, and I could see how maybe that could have turned some people off of, really, we're gonna have Oliver fighting a guy with magic powers, but I think that it worked pretty well. I think that, this is a world where time travel exists, and altered dimensions exist, and, particle accelerators explode and give people super speed. You have to, you can't just have, just villains who, don't have powers anymore, really. You have to bump up the stakes and have, a villain with superpowers, with magic, mystical powers. I think that worked very well in this season, and I think that it made a lot of sense to have Damien Dark be the villain, because we were introduced to him by name last season as the guy who was in the running to be Ra's al Ghul, besides, against the guy who actually was Ra's al Ghul last season. And so we were introduced to this character of Damien Dark, and so it just makes sense that this season he's the villain. I mean, sure, he's a bit goofy at times, but this is the same guy who played the villain in Mall Cop 2, so you kind of have to have him be a bit goofy with just the nature of the actor. So, he says a bit of things that are kind of just goofy at times, but I think that they balance it well with, again, just setting him up as this very dangerous villain who just is very powerful, and I think they do a good job with him, and having Oliver, the way Oliver has to defeat him is by focusing on the light inside, because they set up the rules of Damien Dark's magic. He gets power from death. The more people who die, the more powerful he is. And so, you see that, he draws power from death and darkness and evil. And so Oliver has to combat him by focusing on light and life and goodness. And, I think that's a good, that's a good thing to have for Oliver to do, because, it's kind of like Oliver we've set up as this very dark, gray person who's broken inside after being on an island, or not on an island occasionally, for 5 years. I think that it makes a lot of sense. I think it's very good storytelling to have this character who pretty much would be somebody who, doesn't have a lot of light inside of them to have to really focus on what is the light that they have, what is the good stuff in their life in order to combat this villain who draws on darkness. So I thought that was very well done of the way they did that. I mean, sure, it does seem a little bit like, we're defeating the villain with the power of friendship, but again, I think that they played it right to where it doesn't seem like that ridiculous. Like, obviously, when you think about it, you're like, yeah, that is kind of ridiculous, but I think that the way they executed it was very well done. I think that they did a good job at kind of making this sort of, again, kind of ridiculous concept, kind of, making sense. Actually, interesting. And then the other thing with Damien Dark is he has a family. He has a wife and daughter, and I think that having his wife die in the second to last episode, I think that was very good to kind of push him over the edge to, instead of doing the plan where he destroys the Earth and builds it back up better, he's like, no, I'm going to just destroy everything because he just doesn't care anymore. And I thought that was very good to have that. Also, with the previous plan, he kind of, he had the kind of like a WandaVision dome underneath the city that was going to serve as, the protective bubble, the Noah's Ark of his plan. And so I thought that was kind of interesting to have this kind of, it seems a lot like WandaVision, even though this came obviously way before WandaVision, but, that's the connection I made with it. But back to his wife dying, I think that was the a good thing to have happen to push him over the edge, to bring him the extra step forward to have, go full, just evil, destroy the world on him. I think that made a lot of sense. Whereas even though, it is kind of a cliche, like, oh, villains just trying to destroy the world, I think that they did it in a way that makes sense. But now I just want to jump back a little bit in the season, because I kind of went a lot into depth with Damien Dark's whole plan and stuff. So I want to go back to the beginning of the season and talk about bringing Sarah back to life. Like I said before, on paper, that's an idea that I'm just like, why? Like, why are you going to bring Sarah back to life? I mean, like, her death is a very important aspect of Season 3. Like, it's the moment that sets off the entire events that happen in Season 3. And they just undo it here.
Not a great plan.
But they did it well. And honestly, when I really think about it, it did seem very anticlimactic to have Sarah die. Like, this character who was very important in Season 2, who's a very main character, just kill her off in just this, all of a sudden, just kind of anticlimactic way. Just didn't feel like that's the way you can kill that kind of character. I think that bringing her back to life, definitely, even though it seems like they're really just kind of undoing a lot of what Season 3 did, and makes sense. I think that, you have this thing, you have this Lazarus pit that can bring people back to life, and they use it, it makes sense that Laurel is going to want to use it to bring Sarah back. And I'm glad that they had Nyssa destroy the Lazarus pit after she used on Sarah, because I think that having the Lazarus pit as a thing that exists in this world it's too tempting. It's too too much of a plot device that can be used too often to just bring back any dead character. So I think that just destroying it flat out was the right choice to make, to make the deaths of characters more meaningful. If you have this thing right here that can bring back any person, it just seems like it's just this thing where, if it exists, it just seems like any death that happens is just like, alright, well, why don't you just bring them to the Lazarus pit? And so, yeah, I think destroying the Lazarus pit was a good idea. And I think that the other thing they did a good job with the Lazarus pit was showing the consequences of it. Sarah, she comes out, she's crazy. She's trying to kill Thea. Thea comes out of it last season. Now she has this bloodlust. And they obviously get cured of that. Sarah by Constantine, and Thea using the Lotus thing that Nyssa had. And so, I think that the plotline with, Nyssa giving Thea the Lotus, I think that was very good of having this, Nyssa wants to be Ra's al Ghul, and so she makes the deal that if Malcolm Merlyn gives her the ring to be Ra's al Ghul, she'll give him the Lotus to cure Thea's bloodlust. And I think that this whole plotline, I really enjoyed. I think that's one of my favorite plotlines of this season, because it showed a lot of just Malcolm Merlyn's character, of yeah, he loves Thea, but he also loves power. And he has a hard time of just letting go of his desire for power just to save Thea. He has a hard time of just balancing the two. He needs both. I think that this whole plotline did a good job at showing his character, and I think that the eventual battle they had between Oliver and Malcolm, I thought that was very well done. I think that was a really good fight scene. I think that they did a good job with having it end with Oliver cutting off Malcolm Merlyn's hand instead of killing him. And so, Oliver, he becomes Ra's al Ghul again, but then he gives the ring to Nyssa for her to be Ra's al Ghul. And then, I think that my favorite part of this entire plotline happens, where Nyssa disbands League of Assassins. She's like, no more League of Assassins, it's just not a good idea, we're done with it. I love that. I love that happened, because that was my problem with Season 3, is that, they had this whole thing, Ra's al Ghul wants Oliver to be a successor and becomes the next Ra's al Ghul. And it's like, why isn't he just doing it? He could become the next Ra's al Ghul and then just disband the League of Assassins. Just say, no more League of Assassins, we're done. They didn't say that that wasn't a possibility. And so, I like that here they actually did that they actually showed, no, that's a possibility. And that kind of makes Season 3 a lot worse, because it's like, Oliver, you could have just joined League of Assassins, became the next Ra's al Ghul, and then just got rid of it all. I don't understand why that didn't happen. So, I really enjoyed that they had Nyssa become Ra's al Ghul and just say, no more League of Assassins. I thought that was a very good decision. And now, I want to move on and talk about Andy Diggle is alive. So, throughout the series so far, Diggle, or John Diggle, part of his character, part of his backstory is that his brother, Andy, was killed by Deadshot. And so, on the one hand, it seems like to have Andy Diggle actually be alive seems like it's just taking something away from Diggle's origin story, Diggle's backstory. It kind of seems like if you reveal that Uncle Ben is still alive. It's like, no, that ruins Peter Parker's whole origin story. On the one hand, it seems like doing that with Andy Diggle is kind of the same thing, but I think that, again, the way they did it worked well. Because we never see Andy Diggle die. We never, we just hear that he died. And it's actually seeming like a bit of a common thing in the Arrowverse now, of having dead characters not actually be dead. And I think that with Andy Diggle, it worked well, of having him at first kind of, you're seeming like, he's back normal, he's back to being Diggle's brother. It's this nice thing of Diggle has his brother back. And then, you start to find out, okay, he's still just he's working with Hive. He's working with Damien Dark. And you get this conflict between Oliver and Diggle, because Oliver doesn't trust Andy, but since, Andy is John Diggle's brother, he gets mad at Oliver for not trusting his brother, and so they have a bit of a conflict for one episode. And I think that, in Season 3, they also have a conflict when Oliver joins League of Assassins, But here, it's done so much better than there. Because in Season 3, it really didn't make sense why either characters, why Oliver and Diggle were making those decisions that they were. But here it makes sense exactly why each character believes what they do, is doing what they're doing. It obviously gets resolved pretty quickly when Diggle finds out that his brother is working with Hive. And so then you kind of have this thing where Diggle's trying to go after his brother, and his brother ends up putting a tracker on him so he can lead Damien Dark to Lila and Sarah, Diggle's wife and daughter. And so then you get to this point where Andy is saying to Diggle, like, you let me go, I'm gonna keep going after Lila and Sarah. You're gonna have to live your entire life in hiding. I'm always gonna come after you, and you don't have the guts to kill me, blah, blah, blah. And then Diggle shoots his brother and kills his brother. And I think that moment was very good. I think that's a killing that felt earned. And of course, Diggle, for the rest of the season, goes into this whole thing where he's, oh, I killed my brother, that's so terrible, I'm a murderer now, and it's like, it's fine, alright, your brother was gonna go after your wife and daughter, your brother, who you thought was your brother, wasn't your brother. Your brother, what you thought, is dead. That was not your brother that you killed. I think that having characters just kill these villains is so good. I think that's so much better than the whole no killing thing. Like, I think that just having them just flat out just kill the villains makes sense. I think that's so much better, and I think that moment where Diggle just has to make the choice and just pull the trigger and kill his brother, that worked so well. I think that was executed very well, and they did an amazing job with that scene of just building up the tension and having it release with Diggle killing his brother. I thought that was very well done. We also have a plotline in this season where Oliver's running for mayor, and I think that this was a nice kind of mirroring of Moira running for mayor in season 2. I thought that this was a very good plotline of having Oliver trying to give hope to the city just as Oliver Queen, not as the Green Arrow, just trying to help the city in the light, in the day, as Oliver Queen, and not just by night as the Green Arrow. So I thought that was a good plotline, and having Damien Dark's wife also running for mayor and becoming mayor but then dying, so Oliver becomes mayor at the end. I thought that was good kind of plotline, good conflict having Damien Dark's wife running for mayor too. Definitely seems like they're copying season 2 with having Blood, whatever, I forgot what his name was, but guy whose last name was Blood, running for mayor against Moira. It kind of seems like they're kind of copying the person working with the villain, the main villain, running for mayor. But I think that it was well done here, and I like that they eventually have Oliver at the end of the season become mayor. And they also, throughout the season, have this flash forward of Oliver standing in a cemetery in front of a grave, and they don't show whose grave it is, and so you're kind of wondering whose is it, and they're kind of trying to make you think that it's Felicity. They even kind of fake you out with having them getting ambushed in the limo, and Felicity ends up being paralyzed, and so they kind of fake you out oh, it's gonna be Felicity, and it's not, but actually ends up being Laurel. I'm not sure that, I don't think that worked all that well. I think that kind of just, it's kind of weird. I think that it did give a bit of tension to, a bit of suspense throughout the season, whose grave is, who's gonna die, but I think that it didn't work all that well. I think it would have been better to just not have that at all and just, let it play out as it does. As I mentioned before, they fake out that it's gonna be Felicity. They have her be paralyzed for a few episodes. I don't think that worked perfectly. I think it did a good job of kind of exploring Felicity's, what's going on inside her mind with having her hallucinate seeing her younger self. That was interesting. I don't really know how they like did a lot of it, because they have like her younger self walking like around her a few times, and I don't really know how they actually like did that, but no, that was cool. That was interesting. Also shows our new character Curtis, his, intelligence of being able to create this chip that allows her to walk. I think that plotline was a little bit weird, having Felicity be paralyzed for a little bit, but of course, the person who's actually in the grave is Laurel. And I think that they did a good job with Laurel's death. As I mentioned earlier, they have it be the fulfillment of the threat that Damien Dark tells to Quentin. I think that the scene in the hospital, the conversation between Laurel and Oliver, I think that was very good. I think it kind of addressed the whole, like, Laurel-Oliver relationship again that they kind of strayed away from after season 2. They kind of returned to, their kind of romantic relationship that they had. I think that they kind of, did a good job at finishing that off, having her say that she's happy that he found Felicity, but he's also the love of her life. And, with the photo that she kept, I thought that was nice. I think they did a good job with that. I think that when, Quentin gets to the hospital, I think the acting for him was very good. I think that both Quentin and Oliver in that scene did a very good job at just kind of expressing this, just Laurel is dead, and just the tragicness of that. I think they did a good job at kind of conveying that in the acting. And the next episode, the flashback for that, is back to Tommy's funeral and the events right after season 1. And I think they do a good job with that, of just kind of connecting the gap between season 1 and season 2, showing Oliver deciding to go back to the island where we see him at the beginning of season 2. I think that both Oliver and Laurel, the actors who played them, I think they did a good job at just bringing the characters back to that moment. Because obviously they've gone through a lot of stuff in like the 2 seasons after it, and so I think that they do a good job at bringing them back to that moment. Where were the characters right after season 1? That was very well done. It actually had me like wondering, did they actually just like film that back when they were filming season 1 and like not use it, or was that totally new footage? Because it seemed like they were doing like a very, very good job with like bringing them back there. So I'm wondering like if they actually just filmed it back then and just reused the footage here, or like repurposed it here where it hadn't been used. It was like a deleted scene. I don't know, but I think that was very well done, the flashbacks. I think that having Quentin trying to find a way to bring Laurel back afterwards was, that made a lot of sense, because this show has a lot of characters that are supposedly dead coming back to life. And so I think that it just makes a lot of sense to have Quentin at first trying to search for a way to bring his daughter back. It makes me glad that they destroyed the Lazarus Pit, because that would have been way too easily of a thing to use to bring Laurel back. So again, very glad they destroyed the Lazarus Pit. And Laurel's death also gives Oliver the motivation to kill Damien Dark. I just think that Laurel's death was very well done. I think that it's one of the best deaths of the series. I think it's up there with Tommy's and Moira's, of just being this like death that kind of comes out of nowhere, but also kind of makes sense in hindsight, was kind of set up. I think that they did a very, very good job at having Laurel die in this season, even though it gets a lot of hate for them doing that. But I think that they did it very well, to where, again, on paper, I would have been like, why are you going to kill Laurel? That's a bad idea. But they did it very well in a way that makes a lot of sense. But now let's talk about the finale. I really want to talk about the final battle where the city gets behind Oliver, or gets behind the Green Arrow, and they help him defeat Damien Dark. I think that was a very good moment, because that's kind of the whole thing throughout the season, is Oliver's trying to bring hope to the city in a way that he never could. I think that for the first time, he's actually able to do this. And he does it as Oliver Queen, not as the Arrow. Like, the moment that sets this up is when Oliver's standing on top of the car and giving the speech to the city that they need to stand up against Hive. And that was very good to have Oliver give the city hope, and then have the city back the Green Arrow up. Obviously, it kind of makes, logically, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to have the citizens of the city go up against, fighting the trained soldiers of Hive. But just, you don't really care about that when you're watching it. It's just this great moment of the city backing up the hero. It reminded me a lot of at the end of Spider-Man when the citizens of New York are throwing things at the Green Goblin and they're like, you mess with one of us, you mess with all of us. And I think that they did a good job at, really having this moment where the city, for the first time, really gets behind the Green Arrow, gets behind Oliver. I think that they did that very well, and it was a very triumphant moment when Oliver kills Damien Darhk. It's this moment where you're like, yes, you did it. You're so happy that that happened. Whereas I feel like when Oliver kills Ra's al Ghul last season, you're not like, yes, finally, you killed him. It's like, okay, you killed him, good. He was kind of annoying. I'm glad you killed him, but who cares? Let's move on. But here you're like, yes, he did it. Damien Darhk was this very bad villain. You finally killed him. You're like, yes, he finally did it. You finally killed him. It was great. It was this great moment. And he got revenge for Laurel's death. They did a good job at having this moment where Oliver kills Damien Darhk being triumphant in a way that Oliver killing Ra's al Ghul wasn't. Then, of course, the season ends. Thea decides she doesn't want to do this whole speedy thing anymore. She doesn't want to kill people anymore. She's done with it. Diggle's like, I'm gonna leave. I guess he goes back to the army because he's kind of mad at himself for killing his brother, which, again, dude, yeah, you did what you had to do. Calm down. And so we're left with just Oliver and Felicity on Team Arrow. Kind of the opposite of how last season ended. I kind of get why they did it, but it's kind of annoying to have, Diggle and Thea leave, and you're going to have them come back at some point. You're going to have to find a reason to have them come back. It's kind of a weird choice. Same thing with having Oliver and Felicity leaving last season. It's like, I like what you're doing, but it doesn't really make sense since now you have to find a way to bring them back. But I think it was fine. It's kind of weird. It was alright. And then, of course, you have Oliver become mayor at the end, which I really enjoyed. I like that they did that. And overall, I really enjoyed this season. Like I've said before, they do a good job at just not leaving things hanging, not leaving, having a concern that a character has, and not having that concern addressed later, and having threats that aren't just left hanging, have the threats fulfilled later. There's also the plot line where Oliver has a son. This was set up in season 2, and that's kind of the thing that brings him and Felicity apart, and causes them to break up, because he hides from her that he has a son, William, and it ends up being that Damien Darhk takes William to get to Oliver, and that causes him to decide that he shouldn't be in William's life, and sends him away with his mother to go into hiding somewhere, and obviously that's going to come back up later. And I think that, even though it does seem a bit weird to dramatic with it all, but I think that they did a good job with that. A lot of the hate that this season gets is with the whole, Smoke family, with Felicity's parents, with their conflict. Yeah, I'll admit, what they did with them in, with them fighting in the second to last episode, just, yeah, I'll admit, I just didn't care at all about that at all. So that's one thing I'll say, yeah, that was awful. But that's just one portion of this season. this whole season isn't about the Smoke family. Like, there's a, there's a whole plotline throughout it that, yeah, deals with that, but that's not the only part of the season. There's a lot more, and there's a lot of stuff that actually works very, very well in this season. So, I really enjoyed the season overall, and I think that it's much, much better than season 3. If you just watched it when it came out, and you haven't seen it since, and you're just like, it's awful, it's awful, it's awful, just go back to it. Just go back to it, watch it again, and just give it a chance. Because it really is not as bad as people say. But anyway, those are my thoughts on Arrow Season 4. Please comment below yours. Do you love it? Do you hate it? If you hate it, please tell me why, because I just do not get why people hate this season so much. Because, again, personally, I really, really thoroughly enjoyed it. But yeah, just comment below your thoughts on Season 4 and on the video. And remember to give this video a like. Consider subscribing to the channel and maybe check out some of my other videos. And with that said, that's a wrap.